Gentlemen, kindly give a warm welcome to the Professor of Sociology at the University of Toronto and your President of ASC, Candace Kruchman.
Thank you, and welcome to the awards ceremony. I want to start by just saying thank you to all the members of the standing committee who worked really hard to select these awards we're giving out tonight. There are many hard choices that had to be made, and I really appreciate your service. I also want to say, get comfy, because we have a lot of awards to give out, so get settled in your chair tonight. We're starting with the ASC Minority Fellowship recipients, and I have an important announcement here. As of next year, this will be renamed the Ruth Peterson Graduate Fellowship for Racial. Great group of PhD students who will soon join our ranks, who are receiving this award tonight. Charlene Harris from the University of Kentucky. Charlene here. Yeah. Jeannie Miller from SUNY Albany. And Julian Thompson from the University of Chicago. Okay, Gene Cart Student Paper Awards. This year, first place went to Shi Yan from SUNY Albany. Second place went to Megan Eileen Collins of the University of Maryland. And third place goes to Nathan Lind and Lee Hamilton from Temple University. We also have a new award this year. This is the Mentor Award. It's the first year it's being given. And it goes to a first-generation college student who feels her own success is due to the support and encouragement of mentors she had. She believes our most important successes are those we help to foster in the next generation of scholars. That's Jody Miller. The Ruth Cabin Young Scholar Award. I'm just going to say a little bit about this scholar, Justin Pickett. Justin's research has examined strategies for increasing response rates in correctional surveys and different methods for measuring punitiveness and support for rehabilitation. Most recently, he has examined the relationship between racial identification with authorities and perceptions of procedural justice, and how the ritual of imposing criminal liability affects social cohesion and the public's moral beliefs. His research has been published in Criminology, Sociological Methods in Research, Journal of Research in Crime and Delinquency, Journal of Quantitative Criminology, and Law and Society Review, among others. So he's hit all the biggies. So congratulations, Justin Pickett. Okay, now, the Outstanding Article Award. This goes goes to Isa Kohler-Hausman of Yale Law School. She wrote an article, Misdemeanor Justice, Control Without Conviction. It was published in AJS in 2013. Her article reports on a careful and unique study of misdemeanor case processing in New York City in their lower municipal courts. She used a mixed method approach to illuminate how these courts exercise penal power through the processing of cases that typically end in neither conviction nor formal punishments. She describes the techniques of hassling, marking, and performance that are used by lower courts to regulate the lives of marginalized people. The award committee concluded that this beautifully crafted article is required reading for the ASC community. So, Isa?
So she...
The Michael J. Hindeland Book Award. This goes to Simon Singer for his book. American Safety, which is a case study of delinquency in what is commonly thought of as an ideal American suburb, Amherst. It's a really brilliant book award. Simon?
First of all, to the committee for seeing a bit of my insight into America's Safest City, youth offending, and to my lovely wife for all her support as we struggle through America's Safest City, and to my friends at Northeastern University's School of Criminology and Criminal Justice, thanks for all your support as well. And last but not least, for all the ASC members who looked at the various drafts and commented and made it into a better book. And, well, you know who you are. This award is a reward for you too. So thanks.
Three new ASC fellows this year, and if I spent time reviewing all of their distinguished accomplishments, we'd be here for quite a long time. So I'm just going to ask them to come up and receive their awards, and they're just a fabulous group. Karen Heimer. Now, the Herbert Block Award, as you know, this is the award for outstanding service contributions to ASC and the professional interests of criminology. This award this year is going to be jointly shared because these two individuals are equally deserving of this award. Paraphrasing the nominations letter, never in the history of NIJ and BJS have two scholars and members of ASC served simultaneously as directors. Their work as directors of these agencies not only constituted a very important service to the nation, but it also provided outstanding service contributions to ASC and our professional interests. So, John Lobb and Jim Lynch, or as they were called in Washington, D.C., Jim Lobb and John Lynch. Okay, the August Ulmer Award, which honors someone for their outstanding contributions to justice or to the treatment of criminal or delinquent behavior. This year's winner has conducted groundbreaking research on gangs and on wrongful convictions related to plea bargaining, and has served as a past president of ASC. Ronald Huff from University of California, Irvine.
Wanted to say a few words of thanks to the committee for selecting me, and for those who nominated me. It's a real honor. I've always admired this award, and it was a pleasure and very gratifying. I don't expect to ever win an award like this, but I was gratified to have the confidence of the people who nominated me and selected me. And when I got the notification, Mike Gottfredson, who was down the hall from me, said, "You know, you have to give a speech." I said, "Do I even give a speech for this?" I called Candace, and she said, "Let me check and call you back." So it turned out some years ago we transitioned this into an article that the person writes about one's own career, which, as I said in the introduction, leads to a very different set of citations. And it will be the lead article in the February issue of Criminology and Public Policy. Thank you very much.
Thorsten Sellen and Eleanor Sheldon, and I prefer to say Ellen and Sheldon. As you know, this award goes to someone who has called attention to problems of crime and justice outside of the United States. The recipient of this year's award is one of the most influential and prolific academic specialists in cross-national and comparative analysis of imprisonment and penal policy trends. He's compiled the world's most complete and vetted historical and contemporary cross-national database on imprisonment and homicide, and he's a leading Scandinavian scholar of juvenile justice, sentencing, and criminal justice policy. Tapio Lapi Sapala.
Thank you so much. Just to say a few words. First, I'd like to thank very much for the award committee for this wonderful prize. I assure you I will take it back to Finland with great pride and appreciation, and take good care of it too. This means a lot to us. And also I would like to thank the opportunity of attending this wonderful seminar, fabulous meeting here, and also the parties, which I assume the program also here in the United States. So many thanks to you all, and very terrific seminar to all of us. Thank you.
Finally, the Edwin Sutherland Award. Here we're recognizing an outstanding contribution to theory or research in criminology or criminal justice. This year's winner has been a prolific scholar for over 3 decades, developed one of the most important theoretical paradigms, general strain theory. Further, he has adapted general strain theory to consider the relevance of different types of strains in the etiology of crime and gender differences in criminality and community-level differences in crime rates. So it's with great pleasure that we give the 2015 Sutherland Award to Robert Agnew.
I do get to make a speech, but I'm going to try to follow the example of David Weisberg, last year's Sutherland Award winner, and keep to about 20-25 minutes, because like David, I realize that I'm standing between you and dinner, and that's not a good place to be. We can get the PowerPoint? Oh, okay. Okay. It's of course a great honor to receive the Sutherland Award, and I too would like to thank the awards committee for their work. But I should note that if Sutherland were alive today and on the committee, he might well have voted against me. I know that I'm being honored for my work on general strain theory, but Sutherland was rather critical of strain theory. But at the same time, he was the mentor to one of the preeminent strain theorists, someone who went on to receive the Sutherland Award, and that, of course, is Al Cohen. And Cohen was a major influence on my work, so I like to think that maybe Sutherland would have abstained if he were voting on whether I should receive the award. Even though I'm receiving the award for my work on strain theory, I'm not going to focus on strain theory in my presentation, although I'm going to draw heavily on it. My presentation tonight is very much in the spirit of Sutherland. Sutherland thought that work on the causes of crime was rather chaotic, with researchers pointing to multiple factors that might cause crime. And he wanted to bring some organization to the field, and he did that, of course, with his differential association theory. Well, my talk tonight is motivated by the same desire to bring some organization to the field. Those who know me well know that I'm a very organized person, verging on the pathological. And when things seem disorganized, they get very stressed or strained. And my desire for organization, I think, partly explains my focus on crime theory, because theory is my way of making sense, bringing organization to the field. And my view of crime theory, my way of organizing the field, is very much influenced by the work of people like Hershey and Kornhauser and many others. And I like to think that three theoretical perspectives really dominate the field: strain, social learning, and control. And I, of course, realize there are many additional theories beyond these three, but I think most of these additional theories are really elaborations, extensions of these three. So socialist organization theory basically uses control theory to explain community differences in crime. Life course theories draw on control, social learning, to a lesser extent strain theory, to explain causes of crime among different age groups, patterns of offending over the life course. And at heart, I think strain and social learning theory basically focus on the effect of certain criminogenic events and conditions on crime. And so strain theory, particularly general strain theory, looks at a number of major strains or stressors, and I list some of them on the PowerPoint. And likewise, social learning theory looks at things like association with criminal others, exposure to criminal models, instruction of beliefs favorable to crime, certain consequences of crime, money, status, thrills, excitement, etc. And these criminogenic events and conditions create pressure for crime. If we're drawing on strain theory, they create an attraction to crime if we're drawing on social learning theory. Control theories basically focus on those external and internal controls that restrain individuals from acting on these pressures and attractions. And so that's basically how I organize causes of crime. And it makes me feel less stressed. And I think this particular organization really represents perhaps the master paradigm for criminology. But the last several years, this master paradigm has left me a little bit uneasy. In part because it leaves most of the variation in crime unexplained, and also in part because I regularly encounter variables that affect crime, or I think they would affect crime, but they don't fit neatly into this master paradigm. And I come to conclude, along with many others, that what's missing is that the response to criminogenic events and conditions is not simply a function of controls. Now, this, of course, isn't an original insight. This is recognized by strain and social learning theorists. So my own general strain theory argues that a number of factors condition the response to strains. Some of these factors are controls, some of them relate to social learning theory, but some of them things like coping skills and resources. This is a core insight of constructionist perspectives like symbolic interactionism, for example, point out that individuals interpret events and conditions, and the manner in which they interpret them differs across individuals, and as a result, the response to these events and conditions differs across individuals. The resilience literature, of course, talks about the fact that some individuals that are exposed to criminogenic events and conditions don't respond with crime, and it points to a range of factors that account for that fact. Many of those factors are controls, but not all of them. So you have factors like self-esteem, temperament, and so on. Collins' work on social support basically argues that the response to criminogenic events and conditions is not simply a function of controls, but also social supports. The theory makes other arguments as well, but that's a key argument. The larger stress and coping research points to a range of factors that influence the response to stressors. Factors like mastery, optimism, etc. The psychological research on personality traits, you have the big 5 traits, you have personality traits, negative emotionality, negative attributional bias, etc. Again, all factors that influence the response to criminogenic events and conditions. And likewise, biological research on crime points to genetic and other biological factors that influence how individuals respond to strains, to attractions to crime. But work in these various areas, I think, is neglected in a lot of the mainstream quantitative crime research, which continues to focus on a sort of standard set of control measures, a few strains, association with delinquent peers, beliefs regarding crime, etc., and neglects many of these additional factors. I think in part because we still have this lingering sociological bias in the field, and so a lot of biological, psychological factors tend to be neglected. A few short years ago, they were routinely discounted in criminological literature. In part because the work on these factors occurs in several literatures that are not familiar to most criminologists. We struggle these days to keep up with the literature on criminology or on the subfield of criminology, let alone literatures in sociology, psychology, biology. And in part because the work in this area identifies a large number of factors that may impact the reaction to criminogenic events and conditions, far too many to be readily incorporated into crime research. It's easy to list 20, 30 or more factors that might influence the response to criminogenic events and conditions. And so what I've tried to do, what I call a theory of crime resistance and susceptibility, is pull all this work together, identify the key factors that affect the reaction to criminogenic events and conditions, and more fully explain why these factors affect the reaction to criminogenic events and conditions. So my contribution isn't so much in the way of an original insight. Basic argument that I make has been made by many, many others over many, many years, but I think my contribution is more an organizational one. And in particular, what I argue is that the reaction to criminogenic events and conditions, again, not simply a function of controls, but I argue in particular it's also a function of what I call crime resistance and crime susceptibility. And resistance and susceptibility, I argue, are different than controls or restraints against crime. Control theories assume that individuals are motivated to engage in crime by events and conditions that create a pressure for or an attraction to crime. And that individuals are restrained from acting on this motivation by external and internal controls. Well, what I argue is that resistance, susceptibility, different than control, and in particular, those high in resistance experience the same events and conditions that motivate crime in others, but they don't experience these events and conditions as pressures for or attractions to crime. So they're not motivated to engage in crime, and so restraint is unnecessary. Those high in susceptibility are more likely than others to experience given criminogenic events and conditions as pressures for or attractions to crime, so they're extra super motivated to engage in crime. And in particular, I argue that the individual's level of resistance or susceptibility depends on a set of factors that influence their perception and interpretation of criminogenic events and conditions, their emotional response to these events and conditions, and the behavioral inclinations prompted by these events and conditions. And I draw on strain and social learning theories in the above literatures to identify these factors. The events and conditions described by strain theory create pressure for crime to the extent that individuals are aware of or imagine them. And there are some differences here. So, for example, some fascinating literatures, Bruce Link and Associates, for example, on mental illness, find that individuals with certain types of mental illness sometimes imagine that they're experiencing certain strains and certain individuals are out to harm them. Or the work of Randy Blazak on hate groups, neo-Nazi groups in the United States, finds that many members of these groups imagine that there is a Zionist occupation government that is harming them in a variety of ways. Criminogenic events and conditions described by strain theory create pressure for crime to the extent that individuals believe they're very bad, unjust, and uncontrollable through legal channels. And again, there are strong individual differences here. A lot of research demonstrating that point. And also create pressure for crime to the extent that individuals have strong negative emotional reactions to them, especially anger, and to the extent that individuals feel an inclination to respond to them in an aggressive or rebellious manner. And so, drawing on strain theory then, these are some of the factors that influence the extent to which the events and conditions described by strain theory function as pressures to crime. So you take a given strain, and individuals can sometimes differ, often dramatically, in terms of these various dimensions. We draw on social learning theory. The events and conditions described by social learning theory create an attraction to crime to the extent that individuals are aware of or imagine them. So, for example, right now there's a lot of fascinating work going on that has to do with the delinquent peer association. And this work clearly shows that there are some individuals out there who exaggerate the delinquency of their peers, and likewise some individuals out there who are unaware of or underestimate the delinquency of their peers. Events conditions described by social learning theory create an attraction to crime to the extent that individuals are inclined to model the criminal behavior of others and adopt criminal beliefs, and also to the extent that individuals are more likely to experience crime and the common consequences of crime as pleasurable, reinforcing. So some individuals who engage in crime, experience certain consequences of crime like money, etc., much more likely to find those consequences pleasurable, reinforcing than others. So, in sum, I argue that individuals differ in the reaction to given criminogenic events and conditions. Susceptible individuals react in ways that increase the pressure for or attraction to crime, while the opposite is true for those high in resistance. And what I try and do in the theory of crime resistance and susceptibility is draw both on strain social learning theory and these various literatures and describe the key features that influence resistance and susceptibility. And I view resistance and susceptibility as, the same continuum, opposite ends of the same continuum. And this is a part of the paper that, to be quite frank, I'm still struggling with. And so when it comes out, the article comes out in criminology, it might be a little bit different than what you see now. And still, I have a list of about 30 or so factors that I think influence resistance and susceptibility, and trying to condense them to a smaller number of groups, come up with some catchy terms for these groups. But right now, what I'm working with is, first we have negativity, pleasure, sensation seeking, and then resources for conventional coping and achievement. And each of these general sets of factors, a direct function of individual traits, many with a strong biological basis, the social learning of beliefs, values, goals, identities, emotional reactions, social experiences, particularly background, strain, social support, and situational dynamics. But basically, those high in the general trait of negativity, they're more likely to believe they're experiencing or will experience dislike events and conditions. They interpret such events and conditions as very bad and unjust. They become very upset in response to them, especially angry. They experience an inclination to respond to them in an aggressive or rebellious manner. And so this general trait overlaps with a lot of particular traits. Negative emotionality. Let me just refer quickly to my notes here. But individual traits like difficult temperament, neuroticism, trait anger, perceptual negativity, negative attribution of violence, sensitivity to punishment, sensitivity to injustice directed at oneself, pessimism, low-heartedness, etc. Also a function of social learning. We learn to view certain events and conditions as undesirable, unjust. We learn to react with anger to them. We learn to develop an inclination for aggressive, rebellious behavior, social experiences, severe chronic strain, low social support, etc. And so that's one general set of factors that influence, in this case, increases susceptibility to crime, or if you're low in negativity, increases resistance to criminogenic events and conditions. Second general set of factors, pleasure, sensation seeking. Those high in pleasure, sensation seeking place a high absolute and relative emphasis on money and material possessions, status, respect, power and autonomy, thrills, excitement, certain other psychological, physical pleasures, and a low relative emphasis on hard work and service to others. And again, this overlaps with certain traits, reward sensitivity, sensation seeking, something that's learned, relates, for example, to Marx's subterranean values. To some extent, it's this function of strain, deprivation, and so on. And then the third general set of factors are sources for conventional coping and achievement. And this, at a general level, includes the ability and motivation to cope with strains in a conventional manner and achieve success through conventional channels. And it's a function, again, of a number of traits: psychological flexibility, the ability to accurately assess the situation, select an appropriate coping strategy, self-efficacy, mastery, conscientiousness, social problem-solving skills, intelligence, creativity, self-esteem, social support, and so on. And so we have these three general sets of traits. I'm going to go back for just a second. And I'd argue that each of them, once more, influences a reaction to given events and conditions. The perception, interpretation, the emotional response, behavioral inclinations, and so on. So someone high in negativity, for example, they're more likely to experience given strains as creating strong pressure for crime. They're going to view them as very bad, unjust, they're going to get very angry, they're going to experience aggressive inclinations, and so on, and they're also going to be more likely to be attracted to crime when they experience some of the events and conditions described by social learning theory. Crime is more compatible with some of their aggressive inclinations, and crime seems like, in many cases, an effective solution to the problems they believe they're experiencing. And likewise, pleasure and sensation-seeking, obviously, people high in this trait more attracted to the rewards of crime, more likely to be susceptible to the influence of delinquent peers and non-delinquent beliefs, and also more likely to experience the events and conditions described by strength theory as creating pressure for crime, particularly that are experiencing strains associated with deprivation. Given their focus on pleasure, sensation-seeking, they're more likely to experience these strains as very bad, etc. Similar argument for resources for conventional coping and achievement. So jump ahead. So, a few key points. In addition to those factors that I mentioned, another couple of set of factors that increase resistance or susceptibility, but their effect on resistance or susceptibility depends on the circumstances. And so, there's good evidence that people differ in their tendency to conform, their susceptibility to influence the others, including peers. But whether this increases resistance or susceptibility depends in part, of course, in terms of whether they're associated with conventional others or delinquent others. And also, there's some fascinating research work of our most recent fellow, Ron Simmons and Associates, suggesting that there is a genetically based sensitivity to the environment, and some people are more sensitive to the environment, both positive and negative environments. So if they're in a negative environment, they're more likely to turn to crime. If they're in a conventional environment, they're more likely to conform. And so another couple of sets of factors with their influence dependent on the circumstances. So in any event, a few key points. We have these three sets of factors: negativity, pleasure, sensation-seeking, the ability to effectively cope and achieve conventional success. Now, these factors I readily acknowledge affect the exposure to criminogenic events and conditions. So, for example, individuals with an effective ability to cope and achieve conventional success, they're going to be less likely to experience strains, they're going to be higher in social control, less likely to associate with delinquent peers. But my focus is on how they affect the reaction to given criminogenic events and conditions: the perception, interpretation, emotional reaction, behavioral inclination. And these factors, I think, are also correlated with one another. So some individuals, I believe, will be especially susceptible or resistant to criminogenic events and conditions. Testing the theory of crime resistance and susceptibility. If the theory were correct, we would expect substantial differences in the reaction to given criminogenic events and conditions, in the perception, interpretation, emotional reaction, behavioral inclinations that are prompted. We would expect that variables in the theory of crime resistance and susceptibility would explain these differences in reaction, and we would expect these differences in reaction would strongly affect differences in crime. But unfortunately, testing the theory, fully testing the theory, not so simple right now. We must measure the individual's exposure to objective events and conditions independent of the individual's reaction to them. And that's difficult to do with the respondent self-reports that dominate the surveys we so often rely on, because respondent self-reports in part reflect not only the experience of objective events and conditions, but the reaction to them. So someone who's high in negativity, for example, they're more likely to report that they're experiencing certain strains, even though, objectively speaking, they're more likely to be experiencing those strains than someone low in negativity. And also, we must measure the individual's reaction to events and conditions, their perception, interpretation, emotional reaction, behavioral inclinations. We typically don't do that. So, for example, we often ask individuals in surveys, are you experiencing certain strains? But we don't ask them, how bad are these strains? How unjust are they? How controllable are they? What's your emotional reaction to them? What inclinations do you feel when you're experiencing these strains? So hard to fully test the theory of crime resistance and susceptibility with the existing data, but nevertheless, we can provide a rough test of the theory. We would expect conditioning effects. Criminogenic events and conditions should have a larger effect on crime when the variables in the theory increase susceptibility, smaller effect when they increase resistance. And we would expect these variables to have a direct effect on crime because most people at least occasionally experience criminogenic events and conditions. Kind of make a similar argument with respect to control theory. When you think about it, control theory should only condition the effect of criminogenic events and conditions on crime. But control theorists argue that most people regularly experience provocations, temptations, so controls have a direct effect. And you could, I think, make a similar argument with the factors that affect resistance and susceptibility. So, in conclusion, the theory draws on work in many areas. Again, it's not an original insight that motivates the theory. It draws on constructionist perspectives, although I don't get into this in my talk, but I will in the article. The theory talks about how the reaction to criminogenic events and conditions can involve both what's known as cool and hot processing. Constructionist perspectives focus on cool processing, where you sit back, you think about how to interpret this, etc. But you can also have hot processing, which is more automatic, biologically based. It draws on the resilience literature, draws on the research on personality traits, stress and coping, social support, and so on. But I think it builds on these literatures in several ways. It specifies the nature of resilience and susceptibility, distinguishing it from control or restraint. It highlights the key factors from a range of areas that affect or index resistance and susceptibility. It sheds light on both individuals in high-risk environments who refrain from crime, the focus of the resilience literature, but also on individuals in low-risk environments who engage in crime. There aren't as many of those, but they're an interesting and sometimes important group. They often appear in the media because we can't make sense of what's going on. And I think the theory of crime resistance and susceptibility expands the master paradigm of criminology, so it adds resistance and susceptibility to strains, social learning, and controls. And I think it has the potential to substantially improve the explanation of prediction of crime, points to several potentially important variables that are now neglected in criminology, and it points to a neglected set of iterating processes. But of course, the theory is in need of testing, but in the meantime, the theory has another very important benefit, in that it makes me feel more organized. And so I said I'd keep it to about 20-25 minutes, and I think I did so. So again, thanks for your patience. And, thank you.